The five toughest is one of the biggest features on Rugby AM, and I think Adrian Maul is still powering through our YouTube channel. We're really privileged to have John Wilkin here, who's played with some of the finest players to have been through Super League. And I wanted to ask you, John, who are the five toughest players? And toughness is relative, because it's not always about who's the biggest puncher, the biggest hitter. Sometimes that might be mental, but starting with maybe number five, who'd be the five toughest players you've played with?
Yeah, I think number five would be Ruben Wiki. I've not played with him, but played against him. Am I allowed?
Yes, you can.
Is that all right?
You can, yeah, come across, absolutely.
So we played the Kiwis at the Wellington at the Cape Tin. I stepped off my left foot and Ruben Wiki hit me, picked me up, dropped me on the cricket square in the middle, knocked me out. And I was like, not only that, I think he was apologetic about doing it. And I think a key characteristic of toughness is that humbleness with it too.
Typical of the Kiwi boys, isn't it? Give you a whack and apologise.
Yeah, then be sorry about it.
Did we play against New Zealand in 2005? I don't know if you remember, there's at Warrington.
Yes,
I remember playing against him there. And I always said he was like the bloke was like a statue. Like, you just got a hold of him and could not move him. It was like tackling a big steel post. Horrendous, so I can completely get that. Who's number four?
Number four, I think because I was quite gobby as a young player, or not gobby, I just spoke. And that, I think, ruffled like some people's feathers, and I think I ruffled Moz's feathers a bit at the start of my career. So, you know, I think not because he was handy, because Moz was handy, wasn't he? He could scrap, and he was aggressive, and he was violent when he played. That's not why I value Moz as tough. I think Moz was tough because of his mental approach to his work.
Absolutely, yeah.
His resilience, his fitness for a big man, and tough because, you know what, he always made tough decisions in his career. You know, he went down under when money wasn't really a thing. It was 3-1 exchange rate, probably against him going down there.
Probably, yeah, at the time.
And you know, he went and forged a life for himself and his family down there, and that's tough. You know, he was tough on the field. He was a tough competitor in training and made some tough decisions through his career as well.
I think a lot of rugby league players are very obviously industrious. I use that word because it's not always about skill. You don't even have to have any skill, I don't think, to play. Some of the best ones that I played with had none, just a sheer determination to succeed. And I wanted to ask you, obviously we spoke a bit before about St Helens, and some of your finest years there was quite chaotic, and you know, we talked about culture and how when you look back now as a definition of culture, there probably wasn't any, just a lot of fun, a lot of young lads having that social culture, if you like. And I wonder, what do you think Moz, as somebody who used to come training, he'd stink a beer from the night before, but yet still win all the fitness contests?
Absolutely,
would he have been a perfect fit for that sort of
he'd have been great.
Mid-noughties,
absolutely, yeah. I think he came back to Bradford in 2005, didn't he?
That's right,
for the grand final. And like Moz is an iconic player, isn't he? You know, we're probably lacking iconic players, and Moz was one of those guys. You know, highly respected by everyone. You know. But yeah, he would be a guy who would drink enough Guinness to kill a horse and then win the yo-yo test. If that's not tough, nothing is, Jonesy.
Absolutely. Inspiration right there.
Inspiration, yeah.
Who's your number three, John?
Number three, he's my mate, so I'm biased, but Paul Wellens.
Right.
I think one thing that people don't recognise about Paul is he's the most unlikely rugby player of all time. You know, he's relatively slow. He's not particularly agile. He's not strong. You know, he's not really strong. He's got great balance, and he was quite elusive in terms of his balanced running style. But he was tough mentally. Like he was ferocious in his attitude to competition. He was, I think, if pound for pound, one of the best fullbacks that we've ever seen. And it's hard then when you look at someone like Billy Slater and you talk about, but I think Paul was a better player, just gifted with poorer physical characteristics. I think and we talk about toughness, and toughness is a strange word, isn't it? Because it evokes, like, you know, violence and fighting and all of that. Well, that wasn't Paul. Like, I think he punched one person, you know, in his career, and that was it. So it wasn't that, it was a willingness to compete, and wherever there was action, he was there. I remember Leslie Vinocola made a break at Bradford. You know, when he was in his right, you know, you couldn't tackle him. Yeah. You know, he was like a ferry coming at you. And I remember he made a break against us. I think that was 2004. And Wello, you know, a lot of fullbacks would have, you know, you make a valiant attempt there, but realistically, you don't do a job and he scores and everyone goes, wow, what a powerful guy. Well, Wello just like sprinted towards him and flopped him into touch, and I was like, oh, good. Brilliant. And then he drank a load of Guinness and trained really hard too.
Yeah. It's redefining professionalism. You know what, I've learnt a lot from the players that I've been involved with over the years. And there's this idea that you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. You spent your time with a lot of great players, but there's always 1 or 2 that have a bigger influence on you than more. Was Paul Wellens somebody that really helped you define yourself?
Yeah, he took me under his wing when I arrived. He was still, I think he was 23, 24. He was, you know, he had a lot of time on his hands. You know, it's hard when a younger player comes into a team. In fact, in the modern game, it's nearly impossible because there's so many young guys. I think at that time there was a handful of us. You know, I was the youngest in the squad, but there was not a lot of us. So the senior guys could easily get on this mentoring, like buddying up sort of thing that happened. Yeah. And Wello took me under his wing, showed me the ways of St Helens, and just became a great mate, a confidant for me throughout all parts of my career, and then eventually became my coach. And you know, actually, Paul will become one of the greatest rugby coaches, I think, in town, because of his understanding of the game.
He took me under his wing once. I played with him in Great Britain Academy in about 1998, a long time ago. He's a little bit older than me. So I knew of him, obviously I hadn't played with him, but I remember we played in the playoffs. I can't remember what year it was, won at 7, 8 or 9. And Francis Melly had given me a load of stick because he'd beaten us at Knowsley Road, and it was one of them where you get another bite at cherry. I remember you beating us, and he come up to me and he's giving me a load of stick, and I was devastated. And I says to him, I'll see you in a few weeks. And we got to grand final and won, and I went straight, shouldn't have done. I went straight over to him and I give it to him back, and I thought, I've won. I remember, I'll never forget, Paul Wellens come over and he just says to me, looked at me in the eye and said, "There's a way to win and a way to lose." And I just zumped straight away, walked off, and it never left me that, and it stuck with me, and I would pass that on to other players, that humility. So wonderful. Number 2.
Yeah, I think Sean Long,
right?
Because you know, you talk about halfbacks, you talk about Rob Burrow, and somebody who was you know, sort of fearless relative to his physical sort of limitations, and I think, you know, whenever you start looking at toughness, for me it has to be about competitive spirit and about, you know, that willingness to throw yourself into competition, and whether a disregard for your own personal safety, and with a disregard for the outcome. You know, you could be incredibly hurt by throwing yourself into a situation, not just physically, emotionally, mentally, all of it, you know. And Sean Long was one of those guys that just literally abused his body when he played. You know, he flung himself into contact. He was a small guy, so he was a target for people, but he was ferocious in the way he defended. And then he never backed down from confrontation as well for a smaller fella. And again, very similar to the guys who I mentioned previously. Just an unbelievable competitor in all aspects of life, you know, drinking, gambling, coaching, playing, all of it. He would push it, you know, he pushed all those elements of his life. And I remember being, you know, maybe specifically against Leeds, he'd often be Keith Senior opposite him. And Keith would have like storming games, and Longy would just take it on himself to sort of nullify Keith. You know, he'd just go out and chop his legs away from him, stick his head, get barreled over, jump back up, and he'd just go and go again with Longy, and he would, you know, I don't think I'd ever see the guy throw the towel in, and trained incredibly hard, you know, in some really bad states, you know. So I think Sean Long, he probably doesn't get the credit for his toughness, more for this mercurial sort of flamboyant, maybe rock starry type guy, but underneath that was just a real competitive drive for me makes him an incredibly tough athlete.
Have you read his book, Longy?
Yeah, I've read it. Yeah.
Implicated a few times in a few of them stories.
Well, I will say that's the world in Sean's eyes. It's not true, is it? Like a lot of those stories, I think Sean puts himself in the story, where I think there's quite a few of them he wasn't actually there. And then there's certain stories where he just throws people under the bus, and you know, it's just, I'd say, if you view it as a fiction or a nice novel, like that's what it is. It's not, I don't think, a true autobiography. It's easy for me to say that because I think he's quite scathing about me and my behaviour on some of it.
Chopper Reid, never let truth get in the way of a good story. Yeah. Sean Long there. So, big drum roll. Who's number one toughest player, John?
James Roby, without doubt, because his resilience and robustness and sheer like dogged determination I've never seen in another human being. Right. I've never seen a guy move when you shouldn't, a guy run when you shouldn't, a guy tackle someone when you shouldn't, a guy kick chase when you shouldn't. And there's a lot you can say about James, and he's become a very refined player as well. He's not just that, but if you look to explore the effort areas of rugby league, I don't think you'll find many people in the world who display effort when it shouldn't be present more than James Roby. And that's pure mental grit. That's why he's like that. It's nothing more than that. He's not exceptionally fit. I mean, he is a fit guy. Yeah. But you know, if you do pre-season testing and he wins it or he's there or thereabouts, but it's the toughness of mentality to do it when you don't need to. You know, he'll chase somebody back at Wakefield away when you've won by 30 points and just force them into a corner for no, you know, you didn't need to do it. But the effort areas that he does well and the example he sets has built a toughness into the current Saints team that makes them the best team in the competition. And it's built around his actions. And those tough actions, those selfless, giving up of his own energy to help and support his teammates is the reason why, for me, he's one of the toughest players to play the game in this country. I
don't know if it was you that defined the phrase or created it, cultural architect. Is he one of them? Is he one of those guys?
Yeah, without doubt. And he's not, like I said, me and James were different. You know, I'd use words and speak, and James was quiet and humble, and when we worked together, you know, his application and effort was something I admired. You know, I'd watch, you know, you're saying you're being critical of yourself. Yep. At times I'd watch a video back of the game or something, and you see James come into a picture chasing someone, and I always think, I should be there, why is he there? Yeah. You know, and it used to blow my mind how often you'd do that, and it took maybe Justin Holbrook to come in as a coach to recognise these details that James did. And when you blow the lid off these tiny incremental little efforts that he makes, you start to then go, wow, this guy's been doing a different thing for a long time, you know.
An enigma. There's been, do you know what, it's been a bit of a smelting pot for ruckers. Do you know, obviously Kieran Cunningham, even Mickey Iron for a spell, it was amazing when he was playing at Saints, and then you've got this young James Roby. One of them's got a statue outside the ground in a corner, and rightly so, because I always ask the question, when you're having these little bits of trivia in rugby league and you throw the impossible question on somebody, you always say you're in a grand final and you can pick Kieran Cunningham or James Roby at their best to play number 9. So I'll throw this at you, John. I'll throw you off to finish. Who would you have in your team?
I've got to pick Kieran Cunningham, but the only reason being is Kieran made my career. Right. So I just followed him around. Okay. He ran and then he passed it to me, and I made breaks. Right. Like, I never created any clean breaks in my career. I just followed Kieran around. Right. So the reason I had a full career and a big career was probably what Kieran did for me at the start, and he ultimately developed James Roby into the player that he is now. James' back end of his career is a reflection that he could play off the bench for the first 8 years of his career. You know, he had like a period at which he was just learning, developing, making mistakes, getting better, learning maybe the things Kieran didn't do. By the back end of his career, Kieran wasn't what you call an effort-based player. He was at the start of his career. But then James maybe just learned, refined and developed that. But if you asked on his day, at his best, destructive best, it'd have to be Kieran, because he was unplayable for a period of time. Whereas James is 9 out of 10 every week, but very occasionally gets to 10 out of 10. I'd say Kieran was 10 out of 10 5 times a year, but it could also be a 4 out of 10, you know.
Class, great way to finish. It's like Ragnar Lothbrok and Bjorn Ironside. You've got the legend there and the writer of that legend. Absolutely brilliant. That's John Wilkins, 5 toughest players.